And if you're confident that the system works, and you're confident that you're in your own abilities, and you're willing to make the commitment to follow the rules, then you're way ahead of the game, and you have a better chance of success than most people. Just go for it.
Yeah.
That's what I did. I just gave everything up and I went for it.
Hmm. Is that where you kind of think that this like inner desire to be an entrepreneur, to be a business owner, it's kind of, as you just said, like building all these skills, kind of building the confidence, but it sounds like it really was like an internal feeling that you always knew you were meant to be a business owner, meant to be an entrepreneur. All right, everyone. I'm super excited. We got the legendary Doc Cohen back with us for the second time on the Conquer the Mind podcast. So, Doc, thank you so much for joining us again.
I'm happy to be here. I'm just back from Minneapolis, where I was privileged to be on a great panel with some other franchise legends talking about responsible franchising.
It's a good topic, Doc. We might have to dive into that a little bit today. I wanted to really dive into a little bit like the history of franchising. I think would be really beneficial. I know the previous episode we touched a little bit on kind of the FDD and the item 19 and kind of all that good stuff. But I think for a lot of potential franchise owners, you know, one of the top questions is, what do the financials look like? What does the ROI look like? And for a lot of people even interested in franchising, they're still not necessarily aware of what an FDD is, or really how many regulations, laws there are in franchising, and how every potential franchise owner gets disclosed this FDD that really gives them, you know, a pretty good idea of what those potential financials could look like. But I understand, Doc, it didn't start as an FDD. It actually started as a UFOC.
Exactly.
Can you dive into, for the viewers, Doc, or I guess even before UFOC was created, what was things like when you first signed that contract? Did you have a UFOC to look at, or what was that outlook like?
No, I'm giving away my ancient age by doing this, but there was no UFOC, which stands for Uniform Franchise Offering Circular. So when I came in back, I guess, signed my agreement in before most of you were born in 1978, and there was no UFOC. There was no franchise rule. There was no federal regulation of franchising, but there were, I believe, 14 what we still refer to as registration states.
Okay.
And in those states, there was a disclosure requirement. The UFOC was designed to make prospective franchisees aware of what it was that they were getting themselves into. And so it was a document that disclosed all of or was supposed to have disclosed all of the requirements from the franchisor that would be imposed upon the franchisee as a member of that franchise, as a franchisee in that system. It also included a copy of the license agreement. But there was no requirement back then when I signed to disclose anything, and so I remember that I just was handed a license agreement and said, sign it.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I'd like to read it. And you don't have time to read it.
These are a lot of red flags for anyone listening.
Well, that's really not true. I had time to read it. They gave me the document. I was smart enough or dumb enough, I guess, to have used a very, very good law firm and a firm that had a franchise law specialist. I strongly recommend to anybody today, even with the franchise disclosure document, which is the new UFOC, now called the franchise disclosure document. Get yourself a franchise specialist. I don't recommend using your typical business attorney, no matter how good he or she might be.
Yeah.
I had one of the best. out in California. I had one of the most recognized and esteemed law firms and one of the best business attorneys in the firm, but I went ahead and used their franchise specialist, and I strongly recommend to people today that they do that. So there was no regulation. I did sign up after trying to negotiate that license agreement, which was not an easy task back then. They didn't want to make too many changes in it. Um, and it was kind of I would say back then franchisors tended to have pretty onerous agreements, at least from my perspective.
Mm,
A lot of that was designed to protect the system.
mm,
Um, in some respects, when I look back at that and I say, I hated signing. My attorney told me not to sign it,
yeah.
but I did anyway, and it all turned out pretty well, didn't it?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Um, back then, I didn't know any better, I guess, but I really wanted to be part of this franchise because I could see the potential, and I knew the founders had a really good idea, and they were really smart people. Um, and so I went ahead and signed it, and hope that they would just put it in the drawer and never pull it out again. And that's kind of what I hope for today with the franchise disclosure document. That after you have to recognize that it is the franchisor's responsibility to protect the system.
Mm,
That's really important because it protects me as a franchisee. So today, when you sign that franchise disclosure document and your license agreement, the hope is that that gets put away in a drawer and never pulled out again.
yeah.
And that's typically the case
Mm,
with good franchisors today. Is that you don't have to look at it again. You've joined a system that's been tested over and over and over and proven to be successful. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, that's super helpful, Doc. And I really like the point on having a franchise-specific attorney review the document. That's definitely something I advise any client that I work with. And I really like the point on they could be like a business attorney, but having that franchise-specific experience, someone that has actually looked and analyzed FDDs before, and someone that isn't biased. So, for example, someone that only works with franchisees, for example. So they're not biased on the franchisor side as well. So I think those are really great points. Do you want to just briefly dive into the differences between the FDD and the franchise agreement as kind of like those two big legal documents that those potential franchise owners will go look through during the course of their kind of like discovery process?
I think the FTD is designed to give you more information about the franchisor.
Hmm.
It delves into their financial situation. In fact, includes copies of their financial statements, which some franchise agreements do as well.
Hmm.
It will typically provide you with a list of locations throughout the country or throughout the world, if
Hmm.
it's an international franchise. It will give you a list, perhaps, and probably of many, if not all, depending on the size of the system, of franchisees in the system with contact information.
Hmm.
It will frequently give you a list of people who have left the system recently, a list of locations that have closed, um, which is sometimes misleading because sometimes locations are closed but reopened
Hmm.
um, through the sales process. People who retire and sell their unit, typically
Yeah.
that unit's closed, but then a new one opens. So
Hmm.
you have to really read this, and that's why I recommend a franchise attorney who's going to point these things out to you,
Hmm.
just from experience. Whereas the license agreement is more specific, many times about exactly what your obligations are, what your development schedule is if you're signing a multi-unit contract. But the franchise agreement is the actual contract itself.
Hmm.
So I think that's probably the difference, but they tend to go along with each other.
Hmm.
You need to study both and understand both.
Yeah, no, I think those are really great points. As someone is kind of going through the process, they get these 200, 300-page legal document. It can be very intimidating, but it really is for their protection if they were to become a potential franchise owner, and really allow them to really create this total picture of what their potential life could look like, especially not as much in the newer emerging brand, but when you look at a well-established brand that's been out there 5, 10, 20 plus years, you can really start to piece together like the missing pieces of the puzzle, if you will, and kind of see what your potential life could look like. So I really like that doc. And as we're talking about the FDD, the UFOC, what what was like the transition like from the UFOC to the FDD? Was there like a lot of like controversy of like things missing in the UFOC, or why did they want to change it away to the FDD? Did they just not want UFO in the name because that could be a little intimidating for people?
No, I'm not sure that's the case. I think it was just time to update the document and make it more clear,
Okay.
so that potential franchisees would have a better understanding of what they were getting into. The franchise rule has been around now for quite a long time. The FTC, in fact, is looking at the review of it as they do periodically.
Mm,
Frankly, I hope they don't make any changes, or if they make any, that they're minor, because the current FDD requirements seem to work really, really well.
yeah.
I know comments are being considered today by the FTC. The IFA, the International Franchise Association, has encouraged the FTC to not make too many changes to the rule because it's working.
Mm,
I think it's a much better document today than it was. Well, there wasn't one when I signed it, but when I did get my first one after my fourth unit,
yeah.
I think it's a better document today, and provides the kind of clarity and disclosure that's required and needed to
Mm.
make an informed decision.
Yeah. I really like because you actually are a franchisee yourself throughout the years. I think it's one thing for a franchisor to say it works really well. If they're awarding selling franchises, I'm sure it works really well. But for someone that made that investment over and over again and says the FDD does really work well, can you dive into like what do you mean by the FDD like works really well right now? For someone that they're thinking about franchising, they get intimidated, they feel like the franchisor is trying to sell them something. What is it about the FDD, especially nowadays, that it really does create like this two-way relationship?
Well, as I've said here, it is a complete description of your obligations as a franchisee,
Hmm.
what you're going to be required to do, what you're not going to be required to do, but more specifically, what the requirements of that franchisor will be. Um, and it also is going to outline what the franchisor's obligations are.
Hmm.
That's a really important part of it, because sometimes people who come into franchising expect things from the franchisor that they may not be getting. And
Hmm.
so it's really important for a prospective franchisee, as you're looking at a system, to understand what the franchisor is going to do for you,
Hmm.
and more importantly, what they're not going to do for you.
Hmm.
Um, just because it's a franchise does not guarantee that it's going to be successful. It
Hmm.
is more likely that you will be successful in a franchise system than in a system that's not franchise.
Hmm.
And statistics will bear that out. And the reasoning behind that is you have a system that's been tried, and the hopefully most, if not all, mistakes have been worked out.
Yeah.
It has been proven to be successful by other franchisees, unless it's an emerging franchisor, and that would be somebody who's just begun franchising. And in those cases, it's even more important to make sure you understand what the franchisor is going to provide to you.
Hmm.
The license agreement sort of outlines many of the same things, but focuses on your obligations as a franchisee and what you're going to be required to do.
Mhm.
If you're signing up in a relatively young or brand new system, it's really important for you to understand the obligations of the franchisor as well as your own,
Mhm.
because it takes effort on any business requires effort on the part of the operator to be successful.
Mhm.
You're not guaranteed to be successful in any business you go into, franchised or not. So it takes your own efforts, um, applying the principles that have been proven to work by the franchisor to make a successful business. Not everybody should be a franchisee, to tell you the truth. There's some people not designed to be part of a system where you have to follow rules.
Mhm.
You know, a lot of us who are type A entrepreneurs, we just want to charge in and fix it. Well,
Yeah.
hopefully it's already been fixed.
Right.
No, I started in a new system. I was the first franchisee at Great American Cookies. Two very, very smart guys who started it, but were smart enough to take advantage of my 40 years of retail experience to help them build a brand and make it better.
Mhm.
Um, and, to their credit, they were willing to listen to a lot of the ideas I threw out there, and they took some of them and rejected others. And
Mhm.
you know what? The system became a hit. It was the most successful cookie franchise out there, and still is.
Yeah. No, I think that's really powerful. Just the idea of, franchising is definitely, and business ownership, it's just not the path for everyone. There are differences between independent business ownership and going into franchising. And franchising, it's kind of very similar to sports, Greek life in college. You're really part of this team where one person's actions directly correlate to another person's actions. And it's just really important when you are potentially making this big investment to manage expectations in every system, every franchise. The franchisor and the franchisee, what they're responsible for, can be very different. So it's very important to be asking the right questions throughout this process, analyzing the FDD, the franchise agreement as well. So I think these are all really great points, Doc, as we're kind of diving in and kind of helping those potential franchise owners, maybe hoping to create that legacy like yourself, and kind of seeing how things have really evolved since not having even an FDD, the UFOC, and now we have an FDD. The last kind of item that I wanted to touch on, Doc, in regards to the FDD that I think is important is the item 19, which kind of gives people a very good idea of the financials. Could you talk about when was this originally introduced, and how has this kind of like changed just the idea of kind of like full disclosure in franchising, I would say?
Well, so when I came in, obviously there was no document to look at, but the franchise agreement did not have to disclose financial performance.
Mm,
In fact, it was discouraged. And the reason it was discouraged is that franchisors are not permitted to make financial guarantees of any kind.
mm,
And back then, it was very what's the right word? It, I say dangerous, but it was risky. Let's say risky for a franchisor to give you a hint of, what kind of money you might make. In fact, the first question I asked was, how much money am I going to make? Right? Because that's what everybody wants to know. How much money am I going to make?
right.
Well, back then they couldn't disclose that. The item 19 gives the franchisor the ability within certain parameters to make financial disclosures, and it
Mm,
can tell you what typical results might be from a typical unit in a typical location if it's a retail store, or from a typical operation if it's a service industry. Um, and it can give you an idea of what you might make, but what you might not make. So
mm,
it's really important today, to me, that franchisors take advantage of item 19 and make those disclosures within the within the acceptable parameters of the financial disclosure. But the best way to find out, I didn't have any other franchisees to call because there weren't any. But today, and today you might be faced with that if it's an emerging franchisor. But if there are other franchisees listed in the FDD, I encourage you to call everyone. If you're buying a KFC, you're not going to call every one of the thousands of franchisees, but call as many franchisees in the system as you can, and ask them how much money are you going to make. I wouldn't ask it in those terms.
Yeah.
But if you pose your questions properly to other franchisees, they're more than willing usually to give you the information that you need that would enable you to construct a pro forma and try to figure out how your business might do. So that item 19 is one of the most important parts of the FDD in my view.
No, that's super powerful, Doc. And as you're telling people, you want to speak to as many franchise owners as possible, start to get as much information as possible. I know one of the things that a lot of people suffer with, especially with kind of going through this process, is really analysis paralysis and sometimes looking for reasons to say no and kind of overthinking things. How do you ensure that you are getting as much information as possible, but also not kind of second guessing yourself and kind of always looking for reasons to say no? How do you balance all this information in a short period of time and also feel confident in that decision, if that makes sense, Doc?
Well, I think there is such a thing as buyer's remorse.
Yeah.
You go out and you buy a house, and all of a sudden you sign the document. You go, oh my goodness, what did I get myself into?
Right.
There is some degree of that, but if you're an entrepreneur, the definition of an entrepreneur, probably not Webster's, but my definition is someone who is willing to risk capital to make a profit. And so you're going to put your money up, and you're going to invest not only your money, but your time, and you're obligating yourself to do the things that are going to be required of you once you sign a license. It's a contract.
Right.
A contract like any other contract, except that it's a franchise contract, which has certain specifics in it that other business contracts might not have. So I can understand a little bit of anxiety, but if you've done your homework, if you've read the documents carefully, if you've gotten good legal and financial advice, and today franchisees, I think, tend to be more sophisticated than they were when I came in. I may have had a lot of retail experience, but I didn't have any franchise experience. But I knew what it was like to take risk. And if you're an entrepreneur, you're willing to take the risk. So talk to other people who have taken the risk and make a good decision. And if you're confident that the system works, and you're confident that you're in your own abilities, and you're willing to make the commitment to follow the rules, then you're way ahead of the game, and you have a better chance of success than most people. Just go for it.
Yeah.
That's what I did. I just gave everything up and I went for it.
Is that where you kind of think that this like inner desire to be an entrepreneur, to be a business owner, it's kind of, as you just said, like building all these skills, kind of building the confidence, but it sounds like it really was like an internal feeling that you always knew you were meant to be a business owner, meant to be an entrepreneur. For someone watching, how did they start to figure out like maybe they're meant for this? Or how does someone kind of balance, do I want to be in corporate America, or do I want to be a business owner? Is it something that they feel like internally, do you think? Or how do they kind of figure out like maybe this is something that I want to explore?
That's a really interesting question. I could take hours discussing that one, but it's funny. I kind of never even thought about owning my own business. I was very, very happy working at a drugstore chain,
Yeah.
corporate America. I was vice president of the company. I was ensconced in the C-suite. I had a pretty good life. The
Yeah.
decision was sort of made for me when the chain got into some financial difficulty. And, as I told you in our last session, I was an early victim of corporate downsizing, except back then we just called it getting fired. I didn't have a job. And, I finally said, maybe I should go open my own business this time.
Mm.
I'd worked for somebody else all my life. I was happy doing it. Maybe it was destiny. I don't know.
Mm.
But I just decided I was ready to own my own business and was willing to take the risk. I knew what my capabilities were. I knew what my skills were. I think
Mm.
I knew what my weaknesses were. The franchise was willing to help me overcome my weaknesses
Mm.
and build upon my strengths. I joined a system where two brilliant people started a concept that people said would never be successful.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that you could make money selling cookies? And indeed, there was a lot of dough in cookies, as we say. So, I got an opportunity to help build a system too. I was really lucky back then that I was in it from the beginning, and I had a couple of founders who were willing and anxious to let me help in some small way to build that system and try to set the example for franchisees who came behind me. And
Mm.
look, I made mistakes. They made mistakes. We all do that. The
Mm.
most successful franchise companies will make mistakes from time to time. Look at New Coke. you know, I don't know if you were around then. You probably weren't, but Coca-Cola can make a mistake, a big one,
Yeah.
back in their history. Then anybody can make a mistake. It's not how you make the mistake. It's how you correct it.
Mm. No, that's powerful. And if there's one thing America loves, it's a good comeback story.
Yes, and we were in the cookie business, and so we were always trying new products.
Yeah.
And we had some doozies.
Mm.
Some were good ones, and some. I remember one we called the muffle. It didn't work. It was a combination between a muffin and a waffle. Boy,
Oh, wow.
it really
Sounds good.
it tasted great, and I was one of the franchisees who was willing to test it, and
Yeah.
I loved the product. I thought it was great. The problem was the consumer hated it. So
Was there not enough maple syrup or cinnamon on it or something? It sounds really good. You might.
no, you know what? And I was always upfront, willing to test anything. I always wanted to be upfront, be one of the franchisees who would be testing new products. But people wanted a fat-free product, so that they developed a fat-free brownie that would knock your socks off, but we couldn't sell it. It
Huh.
tasted great. Nobody wanted it.
Huh.
And then everybody was demanding, or we thought everybody wanted a sugar-free cookie. So they developed a sugar-free lemon cookie that would, again, knock your socks off. It was delicious. Nobody bought it. So, we made mistakes. Some of them were expensive. Some of them, like for the muffle, I had to buy all kinds of equipment to make it.
Yeah.
Um, that's how you grow a business. You try things and see if they work.
Mm.
And if you're a franchisee and your franchisor asks you to help test things, jump in and test them.
Mm.
It's fun.
Yeah.
It can be expensive, but it's fun. Um,
And if you know any franchise owners in the cookie business that are willing to test things, probably a good friend to have around the holiday season. Probably get a lot of free cookies.
that's
Um,
right. That's
but
right.
that does say like something about you, Doc, that you are willing to test out the products. Because for a lot of people, they'd much rather see, the franchisor or, the corporate team start to experiment with things, and then very similar to how your story first started, you literally flew across the country to Atlanta when you were just a result of corporate downsizing. You
Yeah.
invest in yourself when most people are on like this save mode. Why are you like what's like the mindset, I guess, that you're so open to opportunities? It seems like throughout your whole life, you're someone that it's accomplished massive success, and you're always changing things up. Your career isn't marked by like one different thing. You've had success in a lot of different areas. What is like the mindset to just stay so open-minded to opportunities, even I feel like a lot of people would be closed-minded in those certain situations, or even having a lot of success, you're still open to like other opportunities. What is like that mindset behind a lot of your success, I guess, is something I want to figure out.
Well, I think it's critical that you understand from the time you go in that it's part of your responsibility as a franchisee to protect the brand. And you have to understand that the franchisor's responsibility is to protect the brand, and they own the brand.
Mm,
You just have the right to use it. And
right.
so the onus is on you to protect it just as much as it is on the franchisor's side of the equation. You
Mm,
also have to understand that when you don't follow the system and
mm,
you do something different, you're endangering the other franchisees in the system. So when you walk into my store and I have a cookie that I developed on my own without telling anybody,
mm,
um, and then that person buys that product, and let's say that they like it and they're used to buying it from me, and then they go to another location somewhere and they don't have that product. Well, they get upset. Well, why don't you? I bought it from Doc's store. Don't all McDonald's sell a Big Mac? Isn't the Big Mac the same in every place? Well, if I don't put if I don't use a seeded bun on my Big Mac, it's not a Big Mac.
right.
It's not. So if I don't want to have a sesame seed bun, open Doc's Hamburgers.
Mm,
Don't open McDonald's. Because as a franchisee, if I'm selling a Big Mac with no seeds, I'm endangering the franchisee who's a few miles away down the street or in another city.
mm,
And the mindset has to be I'm willing to follow the rules and work within the system. I'm able to make suggestions. The Big Mac was invented by a franchisee.
mm,
Some of our most successful products were invented by franchisees.
yeah.
One of our products was invented by one of my managers. So um, you just have to understand that if if you want to invent a new product or do something different because you think it's better,
Mm,
fine. You can get permission to test something from your franchisor, who may have already tested that for all you know.
mm,
But you can't just go off on your own and say, "Oh, I know better than they do. The Big Mac shouldn't have seeds." I don't know why anybody would want seeds on, sesame seeds on their bun. Why, for millions, billions of sold burgers, they put seeds on the bun. It works.
yeah.
Don't change it. And then
No.
that's the mindset you have to have is, hey, I
Mm,
bought this, I bought into this, and I'm paying a royalty to get what they've already proven. Why would I change it?
mm,
I'm paying to use it. I'm
right.
paying because it works.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's powerful. It's like you're literally paying for it because it works. It's been tried, proven, and tested for years and years and years. And even something like an emerging brand where there may not be other franchise owners to validate with, usually the partners, the founders do have decades of experience going through that business, perfecting the business model so that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. And I think a lot of your points are really powerful. Like if you're a new franchise owner, your goal is to follow the playbook. The top performers are the people that have followed that playbook to success. And once you have followed that playbook, I think what you're alluding to is it really is a two-way relationship. The franchisor and the franchisee are always communicating. McDonald's, one of the most well-known opportunities, a lot of their greatest ideas were from franchise owners. So once you do follow that model, they're very open to your feedback, to your communication. The system, the franchise only gets better from the franchise owner who's boots on the ground, getting the feedback and then implementing that into the franchise as well. But unfortunately, one thing that you're saying is that, if one franchise owner does something on their own, that impacts the entire system, which I think is very, very powerful when people are like, well, I just want to do it myself and maybe like it'll adapt to my local market. the franchise is open to your feedback, but they need to make sure that it is proven in that market and can help other franchise owners as well. So that's where it really is just this team effort. But one of the things that I'm very interested in, Doc, because a lot of times, as we're alluding to, you really reinvented yourself in franchising and had massive success. And I think that's one of the things you see a lot in franchising. And one of the beauties I think of franchising is that you see people on their first career sometimes, their 20th career sometimes. Like there's no like one size fits all in franchising. It really is a lot of just like the mindset. But a lot of times you're in corporate America, you've built a very successful career in corporate America. It's tough to be like, all right, now how do I reinvent my life, get into franchising, business ownership, something maybe they've never ever thought about. How long after you made the transition to franchising that you felt like you reached like a point of success, if you will? If you felt like, once you made that initial transition, it's probably a lot thrown at you in a short period of time, business ownership. Was there like a point, like a few years in, where you felt like you had a grasp where like you are a capable business owner, like these are the skills, like this is who Doc Cohen was? Because for a lot of times you probably identified as someone in the corporate world working at the drugstore chains, but you totally reinvented yourself. How long was it before you kind of like got your boots on the ground in business ownership and you felt like that was totally the path for you at that point, if that makes sense?
Well, that's a tough question, to tell you the truth. That's one of the hardest questions you've ever asked me.
That's what we're here for, Doc. Tough questions only. We got to make the guests think a little bit.
Geez, I should have been up all night studying for that one. I never doubted that I was going to be successful. I don't know. Maybe I was just, maybe my ego got the best of me. I would have to say that, I had a mentor in the business world, who was one of the founder of the drugstore chain, who taught me all I know about retail, taught me about integrity and about the meaning of how to treat people. And I never doubted that I was going to be successful. My first meeting with the franchisor, with the founder, I said, I don't want one store. I'm going to open 10 stores.
Right.
So I guess maybe I was overconfident, but I think part of being an entrepreneur involves a certain degree of ego and overconfidence in my ability. I recognize that not everybody maybe is lucky enough to have that kind of experience before they go into a franchise. But maybe they've got veterans, for instance, make great franchisees because they're used to discipline and they're used to following the rules. Other people are not, but other people perhaps buy a franchise because that's what they're looking for, somebody to teach them how to run a business. And the old cliche in franchising, in your business for yourself, but not by yourself. And that's true, because the franchisor's responsibility is to teach you the system and help you run your business, not to guarantee your success. So I think, look, going through training, I was a rebel. I can do this better. Oh, I'm not going to do this when I go to my store. Oh, no, I'm changing this and I'm going to change that. Well, I realized when I got my first store open, I wasn't going to change all that stuff. It was working. I wasn't going to change it. I guess, again, some of it is luck. I would probably rather be lucky than smart any day. I was lucky that I met people. We were a mall-based business, and I met people in that mall where my first store opened that had stores in a mall 50 miles away in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And they introduced me to that landlord, and ultimately that was the second lease. My first lease was with the landlord in my first mall. And so I already had expansion plans. I didn't have any money. I don't know how I was going to finance it. I didn't care. I was going to do it. I'd find a way to finance it. So I think you have to have that entrepreneurial spirit and willingness to take the risk and enough self-confidence, along with recognizing that you sign into a franchise to learn how to do a certain business, to just dive in. I think, remember from our first meeting, I didn't have any money.
Right.
I just figured I'd find it somewhere. I did. I don't,
It's
thanks to
so
my, thank goodness for my sister,
it's so funny. One of the kind of like big themes of the podcast from like some of these very successful people is not having like thousands and thousands of opportunities like a lot of people today. And I think that's a lot of like analysis paralysis. There's just like so many different things to have success in that we just stay put in where we are today. A lot of times you guys were literally just taking action. You saw an opportunity and you didn't second guess it. You just believed in who you are as a person and you took action, and then that led you to all these different things. But you literally just have a really strong mindset, and then it's followed by massive action. Then you just acquire all these new skills, you build a strong network of people, and then you just continually build upon that. So I think these are very, very powerful, Doc. And one of the things that I think is always really important as someone is potentially thinking about business ownership is having a long-term mindset. I think in business, there's ups, there's a lot of downs as well. I think it's very different, in corporate America. Once 5 o'clock hits, you can have a cocktail, your Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you can clock out for the weekend.
right?
You can hit like the on and off switch, if you will. In business, there's really not an off switch, you're always on, on, on. You never really kind of know what's going to happen. Every day is a new opportunity, a new challenge, but there's a lot of, times where you think things are going one way and then they go the complete opposite direction. What were some of the keys for you to maintain like a long-term mindset, even when you're hitting a problem, you're hitting a challenge? Was there something where you had like a long-term mindset where you're always picturing like 3, 5 years, or I don't know, maybe 30 years down the line? Was there something that always kind of got you through those days?
Well, again, things are a little different these days than they were back then. I mean, I never thought about an exit strategy. Today people think of exit strategies.
Right.
There was no such thing as private equity back then. Today, there's private equity both for franchisors and larger franchisees. I guess when I started, I just figured that's my new career. This
Yeah.
is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to pay my bills and put food on the table and feed my dog. That was all pay the rent. Did I ever imagine where I might end up? I think so. I mean, as I said, I knew I wasn't going to be a one store operator or a one unit operator. Today, in certain businesses, they don't lend themselves to multi-unit. Maybe it's a specific career. I know as I opened my second and third stores, and the third one was a problem. Really almost put me out of business, but I had to do what I had to do to I had an obligation to run this place. I got help from my landlord and help from the franchisor, or I might not be sitting here today at this interview. But I think as I grew, I realized I was in it for the long term, um, and I'm not even sure when I sold the business the first time. I had been in it for more than 20 years.
Hmm.
And I had people who had worked for me that whole time. And, the business is all about people. And if I had had, if my team had been in a position to buy the business from me, but I was just ready to retire. Been
Hmm.
doing it for a very long time. And I was ready to have those weekends off.
Hmm.
So I think we all get to that point where, hey, I've been doing this 20 years, 30 years, 40 years or more. Now it's time to enjoy the benefits of what I built.
Hmm.
So some people come in with a horizon in mind and some don't. I didn't have a built-in horizon. It
Hmm.
just came to me one day. I think it's time, and I had an opportunity, and so I took the opportunity. But as you know, I wasn't out of it very long before I bought the business back. I loved it so much, I bought it back.
Hmm.
I rehired a lot of people who had left after I sold,
Hmm.
built it up again. But,
Huh.
I mean, building opportunity for other people was what really drove me. I really loved having made opportunities for other people to to grow. Like I hired a lot of people right out of high school, and today they have grandchildren, and I still hear from some of them.
Yeah. That's powerful, Doc. And, I'm pretty fascinated just because a lot of times, even with business ownership, people are very scared of employees, especially nowadays. It's always like one of the biggest fears of employees, but it's something that honestly, you're like on the other end. It almost motivates you rather than, doesn't it? Like it doesn't scare you, it motivates you. I remember on the previous episode, we were talking about how the idea of you creating 500 more jobs was something that was motivating for you as well. I guess I'm just curious, what is like behind the mindset of wanting to employ so many other people? How do you manage like so many different people at once? Even, you've already achieved so much success. Why do you want to like keep creating more and more opportunity for these other people?
Well, you sort of grow into it. And what I realized from the very beginning was that I'm not going to be successful unless I learn to treat people with respect
Mm,
and treat them the same way I'd want to be treated and the way I had been treated throughout my career in the drugstore business. I only worked for one employer, and they treated me like family, and they
yeah.
trusted me with a lot of things that most business owners might not think about trusting other people with. So from
Mm.
my very first store, in fact, um, one person that I hired to wash bakery pans ended up being president of the company. And today he's now
Awesome.
a franchise owner. He owns some of the stores that I used to own.
That's
So
incredible.
I got a phone call last month from somebody who was not even a store manager, but worked in a store for a long time. He called to tell me how much he appreciated what he learned working in my company.
Mm,
And what I learned was if you take care of people and give them opportunities, they will take care of you. And in the
mm,
beginning, I knew everybody who worked in every store. But as you grow and you go from having 10 employees to 20 to 30 to 50 to 100, you can't possibly know them all. Now, we're operating in 7 states. I can't possibly know everyone, but
mm,
I knew everybody in our management team. I knew everybody who was in it for a career.
mm.
We employed many high school kids. We were their first job usually, and we
Yeah.
didn't expect them to stay around very long. We expected them to, have movie money and date money, but move on to go to college. But those who stayed with us, I knew all of them. I knew about their families.
Mm,
I knew a lot of when they had issues. I knew enough to offer them help when I could.
yeah.
I remember. I mean, for one instance, we had a manager after a hurricane in Houston whose home got flooded out, didn't have any furniture or anything, and
Mm,
needed money. We loaned her enough money to refurnish her home, and I hoped I'd get paid back one day. And if I did, great. And if I didn't, but I got paid back every dime.
mm,
And those are the things that differentiate um, an employee-employer relationship from what we call a family relationship. I mean, I
mm,
was partners with in every sense of the word except the legal, which is actually how I define the relationship with my franchisor. We were partners in every sense of the word except the legal. We
mm.
weren't legally partners, but we were partners in a venture. My management team and I were partners in this venture. Every
Right.
decision I made, the last decision that I made was hiring the first crew at the first store. After that, we made all the decisions.
Mm,
Never an I did this or I did that. We did this
yeah.
and we did that.
Mm,
And I think that was what helped make my company successful was
mm,
it was our company and everyone was proud of it.
mm,
When we went to a franchise convention, we always stood out. We would take all of our management team. We'd take 8, 10, 15 people to our annual conventions.
mm,
Nobody else did that, but it was a treat.
yeah.
And we would all dress. some way we would have some way at the welcome reception that we were all dressed alike, so that everybody knew us. We would have our company name was Devlin. We would have buttons that said "We're Devlin proud." Everybody knew who we worked with, what company we were part of.
Right.
It wasn't me. It was us. We had. You have to adopt a we mentality. I think that's critical to my success was that we mentality.
Hmm. No, that's really powerful, Doc. And I know as our time is winding down, it would be a whole separate conversation diving into like building a team, recruiting, motivating, but definitely something that you've done an incredible job with. But I want to dive into just the idea of this. I know when you were inducted into the Franchise Hall of Fame, you gave a lot of credit that awards are seldom won by oneself and something you're kind of talking about right now, but it's really just a team of people that contribute to certain awards, like an MVP award in the NBA, for example. Like it's your team that built that. If your team wasn't, first in the league or something, it'd be tough to get those awards. But I guess along those lines, one of the things that I kind of believe is that I think everyone wants to be successful, but for a lot of us, it's being surrounded by the right people. And I think being surrounded by the right people can really like fast track that path to success. And a lot of times you can feel very lost, but I think a lot of it is just not being around the right people at the right time. So for me, or I guess my question is for someone that maybe is not around the right people right now, someone that might feel kind of lost, what were some of the keys to surround yourself with the right people, start building your network? Because I'm sure, Doc, your network wasn't like incredible from day one. You had to like build that up over time. How did you start to like leverage and kind of build a network, especially like from the early days, like just getting started, no one like knows who you are. How do you start to build the relationships with people that could potentially help you down the road and you could potentially help them?
Look, sometimes you just again a lot of it's being lucky, I guess, but a lot of it is when you hire people, you learn who the good people are, and you learn who your mistakes are sometimes.
Mm,
I mentioned the young man I hired to wash bakery pans who rose up and became president of the company. We're still in touch. His kids are like my grandkids. Um, my other vice president and I are still very, very close. His son is my godson. We're still in touch. We speak all the time. We see each other all the time. One of my key managers who lives in Florida now, we call each other on our birthdays every year. Um, another manager and I who still lives in Houston. We talk all the time. Um, how does it happen? It's hard to say, but I know this. I learned, and I may have told you the story about surrounding yourself with smarter people in our last talk when I was at a social event working at the drugstore chain when it was a small chain of 3 or 4 stores, and I was just working as a pharmacist. Where people were saying, "Oh, those founders of yours, your bosses are not that smart. They just surround themselves with smart people."
yeah.
Well, geez, that sounded like a pretty good idea to me.
Yeah.
And that was a lesson well learned because I will take people smarter than I am every day of the week. I don't need to worry about my own job security. If I'm bringing people on board who are smarter than I am, they're going to help me be smarter. And so I would tell anybody, look for people who are smarter than you are and don't be afraid that they're going to challenge you.
Mm,
Because if you're being challenged, you're going to be better.
yeah.
And so I tried to hire the smartest people I could find. And those people helped build the business. I didn't build the business. People build the business.
Right.
My mentor, I told you in our last talk, was Bill Rosenberg, the founder of Dunkin' Donuts. And
Yeah.
he was a little sexist. He used to say a man doesn't build an organization, doesn't build a company. A man builds an organization, and the organization builds the company. Well, I believe that a person doesn't build a company. So I had to build an organization of
Mm,
men and women. In most cases, they were young men and women
yeah.
who came in. Many had never been given any responsibility in their lives. And I was willing to give them responsibility, and they ran with it.
Mm.
And the smartest ones I was able to keep, and the others we parted on good terms. But look for people smarter than you are, and you'll never go wrong.
No, that's a really good advice for anyone that is trying to build a network. I really like the idea of the people and the organizations, because I feel like that's really oftentimes what kind of separates those top, middle, and bottom performers, or even those people that are able to get to the second, the third unit, being able to not only understand what your business model is, but understanding how people work. Because the more you build relationships, build people up, it really becomes that two-way relationship where, there does become a certain point. This is why people look to franchising, where they can't do everything themselves. So they start to look for franchisees. So I think these are really powerful points. And Doc, I know this hour did fly by already. It's already over.
Well, we have to do another one.
I've got more questions for you, Doc, so I'm always ready to go.
Well, let me leave you with this. People look to the leader. My job was to be the leader. And if I led in the right direction, people will follow. So, be a leader. Attract good people. You'll be successful.
No, I love it. That's awesome. Well, I appreciate everyone tuning in. I always do like I say brief, but it usually ends up being a pretty long recap at this point. So, Doc, if you have to go, feel free to head off, but I'm going to dive into the quick recap.
Hey, I'm all yours.
All right. So, starting with just the FTD that we discussed with, I think it's just really important to realize, like, franchising is so heavily regulated at this point for your potential protection as a potential franchise owner. Like, you get contact information of all the other franchise owners, the previous franchise owners that sold. You're going to look at the numbers, the item 19 that we discussed, and just hearing from someone like yourself, Doc, that got involved in franchising in the 1970s with not a lot of regulations, to hear what you have to say, that the FTD really does work well for the two-way relationship. And it really does make managing expectations a whole lot easier, because you're making this big investment. Our goal with JD Strategic, really the podcast, is helping people as well manage these expectations of franchising as well as business ownership. It's definitely not easy. It's not the path for everyone, as we discussed. But if you do feel like that internal meaning, business ownership tends to be that path. So I think helping manage the expectations through the FDD, the franchise agreement, and then going through this process and asking the right questions. And then secondly, following the system is just very, very critical. Doc, you attribute a lot of your success to following that playbook, following the system, and then coming up with these new ideas after you have already achieved success through the playbook. Then it really becomes that two-way relationship, creating these new ideas, innovating the business as well. So I think that's really, really important. I also like the idea of having buyer's remorse. I feel like a lot of times, people end their life with a lot of regret, unfortunately. But I think what you said with entrepreneurs, they're willing to endure that buyer's remorse because they believe in themselves. And I think, like you said, not everything's going to be easy. Not everything's hard easy as well. But business ownership tends to be that path where you're able to kind of take advantage of your current skill set. And then especially in franchising, start to leverage that in business ownership. So you don't necessarily need analysis paralysis, but you're going to get all the information. And just if you have this internal feeling, business ownership tends to be that path from what I've seen. And also just when you're going through this process, Doc, you alluded to being aware of your strengths as well as your weaknesses, knowing what you're good at, what you're bad at, and how you can use those strengths and leverage that into a franchise, because there's thousands and thousands of franchises. They keep creating more and more. Not every opportunity is the best for everyone. And there's the same thing for every other opportunity. There's retail, there's office space, there's home base, there's every industry and category you could think of. So figuring out what you're good at, what you're not good at, and how we can best leverage that. And then I also just like being open to opportunities. You're willing to test things. You're willing to try things. You're willing to invest in things. So I feel like you're always willing to be open to opportunity, and taking care of the people around you is also very important. Not doubting yourself, I think, is just the number one attribute of successful people, having this strong belief in yourself. And my final point, I know this was long-winded, was you mentioned a lot as well on the previous episode too, is being lucky. I think like you can't trust a man or a woman that doesn't believe in luck to a certain extent, because everything, there is some timing involved to everything, and making sure that I think life comes down to planting as many seeds as possible, but you don't know which seed is going to sprout. So there is some luck to it, but if you keep planting more and more seeds, those people end up being a lot more lucky. So you do put in the work, you put in the mindset, but luck is still a part of that element as well. So Doc, I appreciate your time today. The viewers, if you made it to the end, like, share, comment, subscribe, help out the algorithm. But Doc, thank you so much today, and I hope the viewers had a great time as well.
I hope so too. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Thank you, everyone.